An individual makes decisions about sharing private information with others, in part informed by what they perceive the consequences to be of sharing information with a particular person or entity. Privacy decisions involve private information and the sharing of that information with others. Others want that information because it has value to them. For instance, advertising companies can correlate one activity with another over populations to begin to predict who wants what product. This makes targeting products easier and optimization of products to customers to capture more of the market easier too. That information is then of value to merchants and advertisers and the client entities which use their services. Knowing more about an individual can also enable targeting of their preferences, for instance, charging more for a product that the individual wants. Private information has costs and benefits for the individual, but also whoever has access to that data. For the individual, not sharing the information can mean they lose out on potential benefits, as we will see later. For the data holder, they then need to protect the data they collect and increasingly make sure to honor the wishes of the data subject, as regulations such as GDPR gradually bring user rights further into focus. With private information, the individual has some awareness of what information there is about them, where it is, who has access to it, and what it is being used for. I say some because they cannot always tell from, for instance, looking at a website interface alone, what is going on behind the scenes at the back end of the service with their data. They may not even be able to tell what data is being collected about them through the interface. If we want to know what is being collected, they may need to instead, for instance, go so far as to make a data subject request, as with GDPR mechanisms. Some service data may be linked to data from other services that an individual interacts with, building a richer picture of who they are, how they behave, and what they want from their interactions with websites and apps. The individual may see some of this sharing as acceptable if it leads to more of what they want as benefits. They may not see a lot of this linking of data. Users may oppose the use of the data if they do not know what the use is or which entities are involved. There are also risks to sharing private information. The most notable risk is, of course, that in most cases, once private information is shared, it cannot be taken back. We are trading perceived risks for benefits. This is to say, the sharing of private information is not just a case of sharing more or sharing less. If a person shares less, then they have protected their privacy more, but they may lose out on potential benefits. Sharing more is not trivial either if we cannot see what is being done with personal information about us, or if there are few, if any, means to undo the sharing once it has happened. There is a pressure to somehow be absolutely sure of the decision to share private information with a website, app, or device. Some of that pressure in making a sound sharing decision is that the individual may not and cannot be assumed to be aware of all of the risks and consequences, as well as in many cases having to forecast the benefits. As mentioned, the data given to one service is not completely clear, and that data may be aggregated with data from other sources as further usage. A trade-off is then happening, as a user's privacy calculus, which is dependent on the context or circumstances at a particular time. This relates to how an individual may selectively share information because protection is too costly, or not share in other situations. It is also difficult for an individual to forecast potential benefits and risks further off into the future. There is then an element of hyperbolic discounting, where current benefits are more tangible than future risks, and the user needs to make a decision in the face of a lack of information. Those current benefits are also easier to think about than complex and potential risks. We can only make decisions on what we know and perceive. So uncertainty and information asymmetry play a role here too. We cannot concretely see what will happen to our data in the far future, and the website or app owner may be processing our data in ways that we do not always see. Both the individual and the service collecting their data may apply different value to the individual's data at different times. The individual may inherently be in a weaker position if they need what the service provides, having to either accept the conditions provided by the service or to forego the potential benefits altogether. As well as incomplete information, the individual will have bounded cognitive ability to process what is presented to them, especially if it is technical or refers abstractly to functions or other services that the individual does not know about, or if it simply presents an overwhelming amount of information. When an individual visits a website, information about them and their behavior could be shared with dozens or hundreds of other services. Cognitive limits are also why defaults are important, such as whether opt-in or opt-out is set as default, or clearly visible buttons to easily do one or the other. Users may accept the default settings for permissions rather than optimize for their own preferences. Here we note that privacy-related decisions are not necessarily about the perceived value and range of private information and how it is used. We draw other considerations from the Desperately Seeking Assurances paper by Morton and Sasser. Approaching information sharing in this way, as an information controller, is just one kind of decision-making approach and associated preferences. Individuals may look for particular kinds of details, especially if direct explanations of what will happen with their data are lacking. For instance, aside from being an information controller, an individual may have anxieties about the risks of using a technology, being security concerned. An individual may be a benefit seeker, focusing on the useful aspects of technology. If a service or its explanations of data usage are unclear, or if an individual simply trusts their peers more than a faraway service, they may be a crowd follower. For instance, someone may use a chat app because all of their friends do and believe that if so many people are using it, it must be fine. An individual could otherwise be an organizational assurance seeker, focusing on determining how much they trust the organization, collecting and processing the data, looking for the existence of privacy policies and other policies and assurances. These are not necessarily the only categories of preference sets that an individual may have, but these preference types illustrate that an individual's efforts to protect their privacy are not trivial, and that the answer to increased privacy protection is not simply to share less and less information, as this also reduces the access to potentially beneficial services. One more example of bias in privacy-related decisions relates to fear of missing out, or FOMO, with reluctant privacy behaviors. A theory developed by Weston and Chierson identifies 3 dimensions. Another factor is embedded manipulation, which is often referred to as dark patterns or deceptive patterns. This is where the service or interface steers the user toward a decision which is beneficial to the service and obscures other options which the user may consider and potentially decide are better. This could be as simple as making the button to share a large amount of information with the service bigger than the button that allows the user to have only the bare minimum, smaller amount of information shared with the service. This then represents where services create a dilemma for users. For example, a social media platform may want to encourage users to share more about themselves opportunistically, to reveal more of their interests, for the platform to speculatively serve content to them which may relate to those interests. The 3 dimensions of behavior are relevant here. A user may alter their frequency of interaction, their volume of sharing, and the immediacy of sharing. Signs that they feel they are oversharing and doing so reluctantly can include a sense of resignation, but also rationalizing the sharing behavior of others. And this then also highlights that an individual may be sharing information but also carrying a negative externality.